a break on the momentum and say, I need to pull back a little and take more time over this, because it becomes very easy to just, after a while, feel like you're on an express train going somewhere you're not quite sure where.
How can you tell if what you're writing is any good?
How can you tell if what you're writing is any good? Well, I mean, you have to trust at a certain point that you know a thing or two about sentences. That you know about the sound. I know when sentences are good or bad. I absolutely know which sentences work better and which don't. What I don't know is the whole. Where are the gaps? Where are the absences? Where do I need to slow down? Where do I need to speed up? Where do I need to fill in more details? Those kinds of things are actually much harder, and for that I rely on other people. I rely on editors a lot to give me a hand and tell me what else I need to do, and so I revise a lot. I go through anywhere between 3 and 7 drafts of a novel. Any other questions while we're doing? We've now inverted the whole structure. We're being very sort of rebellious here. We're starting with Q&A and then we'll go into something else.
Why in the Indian subcontinent is the trend more for poetry than prose?
Why in the Indian subcontinent is the trend more for poetry than prose? I didn't know there was such. Well, I suppose it depends on which language you're talking about.
Whatever.
Well, it's not whatever, because if it's in the English language, then the trend is absolutely for prose. Without a doubt, without question, English language prose so far outweighs English language poetry that there's not even, a question of them being in the same arena.
So do you think there is some cultural property attached to more trend towards poetry than prose?
Well, it's a good question. I suspect for this you'd be better off asking the Urdu language poets who are here about the history of poetry. Because the English language writers are very much in a different sphere. And I don't mean we don't have English language poets here, because of course we do. But they're outnumbered. Of course, Urdu poetry tends to enter a different sphere. Noor Jahan will sing it. You don't have to read to know it. It has a reach and an appeal that is beyond anything. You turn on the radio, there it is. And so it's always been very much more, I suppose, democratic. In a way that it doesn't even rely on literacy. Where there's music, there's poetry. So it has a different appeal, a different reach, and it has, of course, a long history of being a very essential part of this country. So that, one of the things that's sort of astonishing about Pakistan, where you have political movements, you have poetry. People are singing poetry. There are, and how many countries of the world do you have this in? I'm wondering, actually, does anyone know in Egypt, are they singing poems right now? Yes, I mean, I'm sure they must be. I'm sure somewhere, I'm sure in a lot of nations, actually, the poets are the ones who, can reach anyone who doesn't have the printed text in front of them. But with English language writing in the subcontinent, it's long been fiction. I think with Pakistan particularly, because we're so interested and the world is so interested in what's happening here historically and politically, that I think non-fiction is really now charging forward in quite a serious way.
Do you ever compare yourself unfavorably to great writers?
Okay, I'm going to take a question from someone else. If there,
You started this?
You started this. I know. I gave you 3.
Jimmy, do you take notes? You get ideas, you immediately put them down, use an iPad. How do you do it?
Do I take notes? I'm repeating the question just in case people at the back can hear it, not because I have some kind of strange learning disability. Do I take notes? Do I have an iPad? I covet an iPad. I have absolutely no need for an iPad, but I covet it. But no, I don't. Do I take notes? When I'm researching, I do. I mean, my books increasingly, one of the ways in which I appear to be making life much harder for myself is I'm increasingly writing books that require more and more research. So for that, of course, I have to take notes. But if I have an idea in my head, I don't tend to write it down. It sort of stays in my head and will sort of linger there and have ideas attached. So, I mean, even if I have notes on a novel, for any novel I've written, there might be sort of 12 lines of notes that are not research. Will just be, and it's often things like, the dates of my character's birth, so I can keep that chronology straight and things like that.
Or if you're reading something and something strikes you and you Would you write that down, or are they all original? I mean,
Well, no, nothing's all original, of course. But it tends more to be that things, I do rely on in some way, memory as a litmus test. That if it's seen that important and that essential to whatever work I'm doing, that it'll stick like a burr. That because when I'm writing something, then that's what my brain is doing. So there's a part of my brain that'll be standing here talking to you, but really the larger part of my brain, when I'm writing, is at all moments looking out for what in this moment might be useful to the book I'm working on. What can I attach to it? And sometimes unexpected things. Very often I'll find something that might have happened 15, 20 years ago, which I hadn't thought of, will, in the course of writing a novel, suddenly acquire significance and become the thing that I want to put in there.
stop by writing by hand, or are you using the computer?
I used to sort of move between longhand and the computer, but increasingly it's just the computer. It's so easy to revise on, and also I write much faster on it. Although that's complete nonsense. I do write much faster, but because my sentences are written so slowly, it doesn't actually make any difference. Yes.
How much do you feel indebted to other language cultures in Pakistan, like Urdu language culture?
You know, I've grown up so much with English as the language I speak and read, that I wish I had more of a sort of reading background in the other languages. But obviously, I mean, you grew up in Pakistan, you grew up in Karachi, and in my family, Urdu is there. But the ways in which it makes itself known are, you know, I'm not consciously aware of them, but certainly with my second novel, Salt and Saffron, I found that that part of my family life, or that part of my family which, you know, I think of as being steeped in Urdu culture, I was drawing on a lot. But you know, one of the things is I'm, in some ways, as a writer, I try not to look too much at where my influences are coming from. I don't think it's a superstition, or maybe just a lack of interest. I want it to come out. I don't care where it comes from. So in some ways, when you ask that question, I'm sort of making up the answer on the spot, rather than knowing. But obviously, I mean, if I had grown up in a place where there was only one language, I would be a different writer.
So,
You know.
have you read Urdu literature or Urdu poetry?
I've read some Urdu poetry, but not extensively. I mean, most of my, you know, I'd say 99.5% of all my reading has been in the English language. So, you know, yes, I've read Faiz, I've read Mantu, I've read Fehmi Daryaz, I've read some Intizar Hussain, but not widely. And it really is sort of, you know, the great writers very often who I turn to, rather than what a proper reader does, which is to try and find the new writers or the ones you haven't heard of. I don't go into a bookshop and go through the Urdu section. I mean, I'm always conscious that there are too many books in the world I want to read in English, let alone anything else. It's one of the biggest dilemmas of the writer's life, actually, is how to divide your reading. And this is the thing no one talks about, but it's, in order to be a writer, you have to be a reader. I mean, there's just no way. It's the most important thing. It's the only thing that is true of all writers, is that they are all readers. And if you stop being a reader, then your writing will halt. So you have to read constantly. And it does become sort of a rather problematic question of, what do I read in the time I have? Because we're all being sort of hemmed in at all sides in terms of time. There's the time you're taking in writing, there's the time you're taking in wasting your time, there's the time you're spending online, there's the time you're watching cricket increasingly in the next few weeks. So if you're going to read, it becomes almost sort of, if I read this book, I'm not reading that book. And I found that I'm getting increasingly picky about the books I read, and I really want them to be books where I feel they're going to give me something that the other books I've read haven't. So you become much more demanding of yourself, I think, as a reader, as things go on. Okay. I'm just going to go to someone else because I'm trying not to give multiple questions. Yes.
What made you write in the first place, and why novel?
And why?
Why novel?
Oh, so what made me write in the first place, and why the novel? If at any point the moderator of the session comes in, please do come up. I don't want to make it seem like I've taken over the entire session. I started to write when I was 11. So there's one of the things I love to talk about when I'm asked this question. There's a film editor called Walter Murch. One of the finest books in my library is a thing called The Conversations, which is conversations between Walter Murch, the film editor, who worked on films like Apocalypse Now, The Conversation, the Godfather films, The English Patient, and the writer Michael Ondaatje, who wrote The English Patient. And the two of them, to me, are two of the great, great minds of the late 20th century, because they're both artists who are very interested in very different art forms. So Ondaatje loves passionately jazz and film. Walter Murch, who's a film editor, probably loves film less passionately than Michael Ondaatje does. But he loves art. His father was an artist, and books and music and all kinds of things. There's a point in conversation with the two of them when Murch said something which struck me as profoundly true, which is the happiest people in the world are those who, as adults, are doing some version of the thing they loved when they were 11. Because, and he said 11 is the crucial age, because you're not such a child that there's no real personality in you. You're old enough to really have a sense of what you like and what you dislike. And you're not yet old enough to become really self-conscious and feel, oh, other people aren't doing this, maybe I shouldn't. So he said 11 really, that's, in some ways the truest version of yourself you find in yourself at 11. And when I was 11, I was writing my first novel. And I did it because I loved books. I loved reading, and it seemed to me just a natural extension. If you love books, I used to read a book a day when I was around 11. But the day would not be complete unless I'd finished a book. Even if it meant, I've never told my parents this before, even if I meant that I, went to the bathroom and stayed there 2 hours to finish the book. I would finish the book, because otherwise, the day really wasn't over. It wasn't a question of the time. And so writing was the next obvious step. And I've never really stopped writing since the age of 11. And so there's a part of me, when I sit down to write, I'm still doing what I loved as a child. It's what I chose to do in my free time. It was probably helped in some weird way by the fact that this was 1984, the Zia years. Wasn't Karachi really quite depressing then? There wasn't a lot to do. If you were 11, everything was in the home. There wasn't a lot of TV, there wasn't the internet, there weren't places to go out, so you would have to find a way to entertain yourself within the home. This is still largely true, but it was even more true back then. Hello. This is the are you my moderator? Thank you very much.